Good day, everyone. Welcome to another EDL 261 discussion. Today, we are going to learn about supervision in the context of language education, specifically on language development among bilingual learners. Before I proceed, I would like to sincerely apologize for the delay in the presentation of this topic due to some COVID and health-related issues. I hope you would understand. Here are our lesson objectives. At the end of the discussion, the student should be able to: first, identify the various factors that contribute to language development in monolinguals and bilinguals. Second, distinguish the facts, factoids, and fiction in language development in bilingual children. And third, reflect on some factors to keep in mind when evaluating bilingual children's progress and in designing ELT supervisory plans and programs. Here's a video clip I would like you to watch.
The human brain cannot comprehend the negative. It is incapable. I'll prove it. You ready? Don't think of an elephant. What happens is we very often reinforce things when we put things in the negative. Skiers know this. Have you ever seen skiers go through trees? Do you know how they do that? It's very easy. If you go through trees on skis, you go, don't hit a tree, don't hit a tree, don't hit a tree. Guess what you're watching? You're only looking at trees. As opposed to follow the snow, follow the path, follow the path. It's the same thing for you. If you focus on the obstacles, all you will see is obstacles. If you focus on the path through the trees, all you will see is path through the trees. It's your choice how you choose to perceive your own career.
Thinking about the negative will incapacitate us to reach and accomplish our goals. As we have seen in this video by Simon Sinek, it is our choice to perceive our own career. Hence, we must learn to train our minds to only focus on the things that will lead us to succeed in our very tasks. Ma'ams and sirs, may we never forget that being a teacher is a gift. Also, it is a privilege that we have to use for the greater good of people. Talking about the mind and the privilege to teach, I'd like to know, what are your fears in teaching the English language? I'm interested to know about this, so I'm encouraging you to kindly share your answer to this question in our group chat if you have time. Let's begin learning about language development among bilingual learners by first answering this question. What is bilingualism? Bilingualism is the ability to communicate fluently in a language other than your native language. The mixing of cultures leads to bilingualism. This means that being bilingual is being bicultural. Being multilingual is being multicultural as well. Language and culture cannot be separated because language is a part of culture. Specific usages of a given word is peculiar to a language and its relationship to culture. Through language, we can express our beliefs and values and also flaunt our identities. Bilingualism can occur in ways other than immigration. People can also decide to learn a new language on their own. A person can become bilingual with dedication and practice of the language. Often, individuals who decide to become bilingual do so because of its many benefits. For example, learning another language can lead to improved executive function, increased ability to communicate with others, and improved cultural competence. In terms of proficiency in learning two languages, equal proficiency in both native and second language is relatively uncommon. Typically, unbalanced bilingualism, or when an individual has an increased proficiency in one language compared to the other, is the most common type. However, it is important to point out that the language that is stronger is not always the native language. People can become more proficient in their newly learned language than their native language if they do not use their native language often. What does the term bilingual mean? A bilingual is a person who can speak two languages. Sometimes bilinguals learn two languages from birth. It is important to note that the first 3 years of life, when the brain is developing and maturing, is the most intensive period for acquiring speech and language skills. These skills develop best in a world that is rich with sounds, sights, and consistent exposure to the speech and language of others. Sometimes bilinguals learn one language at home and another language in school. Others learn a second language later on in life. Let's see what Taylor Swift has to say about this.
I wish I could speak French and Spanish, and I can't.
You can learn that though.
But I haven't.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think of that.
We're almost 25 years in, you guys, and
Yeah.
brain development is not speeding up. What if I could push a button and be able to do something really well? It would be
Yeah.
like fluent French, fluent Spanish. I wish I could
If
speak
her mom
French.
exposed her to French and Spanish in the first 3 years of her life, she would have been a fluent speaker by now. Children who learn two languages before the age of 5 years old often do not have an accent in either language. Bilinguals who learn a second language as teenagers or adults often have an accent. Now let's watch another video of this cute little girl from Cebu City.
Hello. As if today there is no water. Wait, let me, just fix my accent for a sec. There is no tubig. As in, walay tubig para inom lang. Walay tubig para ligo. Walay agas. Unsa na ni? Hello guys, I'm on my way to the market and to buy some fruits. How much is the mango? Is this sweet?
Naintindihan ko siya ng kaunti.
This girl was featured in Kapuso Mo Jessica Soho for being fluent in speaking English with British accent. Apparently, it's because of her rich exposure to watching the cartoon show Peppa Pig. I would just like to insert some of my takeaways from the lecture of Dr. Tupas in the second webinar facilitated by Sir Labiste and the UPV language program. In the video that we have just watched, have you seen the reaction of the vendor? Sometimes, some people judge other people because they sound different. Like, ay kabonggas ang accent, filingera ba? Kana ka girl? Well, just because they sound like native speakers doesn't mean they're wrong. It also doesn't mean that if you do not know English, you are not smart and modern. Moreover, it's wrong to think that if you do not speak in standard English, you do not speak English well. Pike ilonggo tayabe, kapis non. We speak hiligay non, kinaray ah. Kung basketball, basketball gid na, yeah. You agree with me, right? Anyhow, going back to the topic, since we were talking about exposure, let's discover, how do children become bilingual? Children learn to be bilingual by hearing and speaking two languages frequently. Children might hear one or more languages at home. Children might hear only one language at school, or they might hear more than one language at school. These environments will provide a child with the exposure that he or she needs to learn two languages. It is important that families use the language or languages that they are most comfortable for them to communicate with one another. As long as the child has many opportunities to speak both languages in everyday situations, he will learn both languages. More so, learning to speak two languages should be a natural and fun experience. Let's emphasize this. Children will not learn a language if they do not hear it. Children will not learn to read a language if they do not see it written. Exposure is critical. Back in EDL 205, Second Language Acquisition, we were able to encounter Rod Ellis and his take on input, interaction, and intake on second language acquisition. Input is used to refer to the language that is addressed to the second language learner, either by a native speaker or by another second language learner. It is the result of interaction. Interaction consists of the discourse jointly constructed by the learner and his interlocutors. Intake is the part of the input that is processed or let in. As stated by Ellis, 1997, it is axiomatic that in order for second language acquisition to take place, there must be, first, some second language data made available to the learner as input, and second, a set of internal learner mechanisms to account for how the second language data are processed. Time for some thinking. Will raising a child bilingual cause language problems? The answer is no. Being bilingual does not cause language problems, nor does it make existing language problems worse. Bilingual children will learn both of their languages at a similar pace as monolingual children. Research with bilinguals indicate that there is a cognitive advantage in children and adults with strong language skills in both languages. It is important to note that children have an incredible facility to learn two languages at the same time. Learning one language will not detract from learning another, whether it is learning to read or learning to speak. Also, as emphasized by Dr. Tupas, our mother tongues do not interfere in the learning of English. Being multilingual is not a problem. Being bilingual will never be a problem. On the contrary, it's actually a huge advantage. Does a child have a language problem if he switches languages often? The answer is no. This phenomenon is called code switching. It is common for bilingual speakers to switch languages when speaking. This is perfectly natural and is not a cause for concern. At this point, let us enumerate some factors affecting both monolingual and bilingual children according to the study of Virginia Gathercole. First, we have quantity of input and exposure. There's exposure in the home, exposure in the community and beyond, and language use with friends. The home is where young children have their first experiences with language. In Hart and Risley's study of language learning by monolingual children from distinct socioeconomic levels, children growing up in families on welfare heard about 616 words per hour. Those from working-class families heard 1,251 words per hour, and those from professional families, 2,153 words per hour. Thus, welfare children heard fewer than one-third as many words as children from professional households. Let us put it in the context of Filipino children. We have those in the lower class, middle, and the upper class. In reality, those in the lower class have weaker exposure and lesser opportunities for language development as compared to those in the middle and upper class. This difference had a profound effect on the number of words known by the children by age 3. The children of professional parents knew twice as many words as the children in the welfare families, and the differences grew as the children got older. Therefore, those who hear more input in each language learned generally have earlier vocabularies and an earlier command of some grammatical constructs in that language than those with less. However, it is important to note that these early differences across bilinguals, unlike the differences observed for children from different socioeconomic backgrounds, tend to become neutralized with time. This means that those who are initially behind in one or the other of their languages generally catch up with those who showed an earlier head start. Next is the quantity of exposure in the community and beyond. Exposure outside the home is also important. There is ample evidence that, in fact, the language of the community tends to become the dominant language of bilinguals. Children coming from distinct home language profiles eventually achieve parity in the dominant language, which can win out both in terms of the relative proportion of input experienced and in terms of the child's own output. Again, emphasis on exposure, input, and interaction. Also, with the child's linguistic competence and performance. Next is the language used with friends. The language spoken with friends in childhood is also influential. In Miami, Florida, English predominates in friend-to-friend exchanges, even if Spanish dominates in the family and even among early immigrants. This may play a role in the documented eventual parity in English across groups. In Wales, adults' current abilities in Welsh and English, as judged by self-reports, correlated most highly with the languages they spoke with friends as children. This means that a child must share interaction and must experience a language in context in order to learn it. The second factor is quality of input. Beyond quantity of exposure, it matters who the input is from. Children learn language in context and are highly skilled at discovering patterns in the language they are hearing. Those patterns may differ in the speech of the distinct adult speakers, so what the child can extract will differ accordingly. In a study on babies' processing of phonetic contrasts in their native language, Fennell and Byers-Heinlein 2014 found that perceptions were tied to the input infants were receiving. Bilingual babies could discriminate phonetic contrasts when spoken by bilingual adults, but monolingual babies could only discriminate contrasts when spoken by monolingual adults. These studies indicate that quantity of exposure alone is insufficient to explain patterns of acquisition in bilinguals. The nature of that exposure is an important factor. The third factor is individual differences. In addition to quantity and quality of input, the child's own motivations may affect their language development. The social and affective dynamics that are at play in a child's uptake of the two languages can involve multiple factors, including the child's desire for group membership and for the integration into the acceptance by friends, as well as the child's perception of his or her own skills and enjoyment of the languages in. This would be supported by Krashen's affective filter hypothesis, which views that a number of affective variables play a facilitative but non-causal role in second language acquisition. These variables include motivation, self-confidence, anxiety, and personal traits. Krashen claims that learners with high motivation, self-confidence, and a good self-image, a low level of anxiety and extroversion, are better equipped for success in second language acquisition. Low motivation, low self-esteem, anxiety, introversion, and inhibition can raise the affective filter and form a mental block that prevents comprehensible input from being used for acquisition. In other words, when the filter is up, it impedes language acquisition. On the other hand, positive affect is necessary, but not sufficient on its own for acquisition to take place. Let's just remember, learning to speak two languages should be a natural and fun experience. The last factor that affects both monolingual and bilingual children is socioeconomic status. One extremely important factor to keep in mind is socioeconomic status. It is important because comparisons made between monolinguals and bilinguals often overlook socioeconomic status differences that may be responsible for disparities between the groups. In a study by Gather-Cole, Kennedy and Thomas 2016, they examined the influences of relative age, home language, and socioeconomic status on performance by Welsh English bilinguals and monolinguals aged 4 through over 60 on receptive vocabulary tests in English and in Welsh, as well as for the number of other skills. The findings showed that home language and socioeconomic status levels were both highly predictive of performance on language at nearly every age. Thus, it is important to separate effects of socioeconomic status from effects of bilingualism. It is essential to investigate the possibility that observed effects might stem, or at least in part, from socioeconomic status differences. To recap, the 4 factors affecting both monolingual and bilingual children are quantity of input and exposure, quality of input, individual differences, and socioeconomic status. Now, for the factors that contribute to bilingual children only, we have 2. Distribution of exposure, or the complementarity principle, and the relations between the 2 languages. For the first factor, the contexts in which a bilingual child hears the 2 languages are not isomorphic. They may overlap to some extent, but they are likely to be some contexts that favor one over the other language. The distributed characteristic is highly relevant to assessments of bilinguals, especially measures that focus on or rely on vocabulary knowledge. Researchers have argued that bilingual children need to be assessed in both of their languages for a full account of their knowledge or abilities. Because of this, the child may know how to say some things in one language and other things in the other. For example, the child may know scientific terms in one language, but no sports term in the other, depending on which languages he or she is experiencing in each of those contexts. Such a distributed characteristic or complementarity can persist into adulthood so that, for example, academic language may come easily in one language and not in the other. Oler, Pearson, and Cobo-Lewis 2007 argue that this distributed characteristic of vocabulary knowledge can spill over grammatical knowledge and lead to differential performance, or what we call profile effects. Profile effects are a reminder that bilingual children's abilities are not all or none, but instead differ from case to case depending on what particular aspect of the language one is examining. The second and the last factor that affects bilingual children only is relations between the 2 languages. One obvious but critical way in which a bilingual differs from a monolingual is that she or he knows 2 languages. There is considerable debate on the important question of the level of interaction between the 2 languages, where they might interact, under what conditions, and in what type of bilinguals. Gathercole 2016 suggests 2 places where linkages are readily apparent. First, situations in which the 2 languages share surface phonological shapes, and second, cross-language convergence in semantic organization. While there is considerable evidence that simultaneous and early bilingual linguistic systems, particularly at the morphosyntactic level, develop separately from very early on, there is also ample evidence that the 2 systems are linked. For example, cross-linguistic priming studies show that forms from one language call up related forms in the speaker's other language. I remember back in first year when Sir Labiste asked us about our insights on the addition of the MTB MLE in our curriculum. Also, I remember so clearly my answer. Ambal ko, "Sir, it's a burden." I perceived it so negatively. First, we teachers, particularly in the grades 1 to 3, found it hard to teach. We had to adjust. And the learners themselves find it difficult to understand kung ano ang binalan, tinaga, duag, mga likga, ubay likga, lima ka napulo kag lima, kag madamo pa. they also had to adjust. Pero you know what I realized? All those adjustments were necessary. Naman kinanglan adjustment at first. And if the learners learned to learn the basics and the complexities of their mother tongue, learning a second or even third language won't be that hard. We are teachers and we're going to be instructional leaders, and so we have to reflect on these implications, on the factors to keep in mind when evaluating bilingual children, which could serve as guide when we create ELT programs, plans, innovations, and policies. First is expected differences across age groups. We can expect bilinguals to be different from monolinguals, and we can expect subtle differences in bilinguals relative to each other according to differences in early exposure in the home. At the early stages, especially, there is likely to be a difference in the timing of development, in accordance with the level of exposure to the language in question. Sometimes, of course, the bilingual child may show superior performance over the monolingual. For example, cognates in the two languages, in the metalinguistic awareness, or in some cognitive tasks such as those probing executive function. The second one is neutralization of differences with time. Despite initial differences, we can expect that as long as there is continued exposure to each language, bilingual children with different patterns of exposure will eventually gain general parity across groups and with monolinguals. Nevertheless, there may be some structures for which the bilingual child shows imperfect learning. This is most likely to occur in cases of limited exposure, late age of acquisition, transfer effects from a more dominant to a less dominant language, and in relation to minority language structures that are highly complex. The third one is variations according to source. We can expect effects in bilinguals in relation to those who the source of the input is. The variance of the language that the bilingual child is exposed to will affect the ultimate form that the system will take. Next is the importance of other factors. We must keep in mind, especially the socio-economic status level of the child in question. We cannot overlook critical differences on this variable. We now have a better understanding that socio-economic status can help enhance or impede developments in language. The fifth one is high performance in the community language. In cases of bilingual communities in which one of the two languages is dominant, we can expect bilingual children to gain relatively complete acquisition of that dominant language. The minority language, in contrast, may suffer from less comprehensive exposure. The last implication is the need to examine both languages. Because the observed factors affect acquisition of both languages of a bilingual, we need to assess bilinguals' performance in both languages for a full account of their knowledge and abilities. To conclude, let's know the fact, factoid, and fiction in language development in bilingual children. First are the factoids. Each of the contributing factors in isolation can be taken as a factoid, a small piece of information that gives an ever so small glimpse into the reality of language development and use in bilingual children. In itself, each factoid may be true, but it is a limited truth. It by itself in isolation gives a skewed picture. Fiction. The greatest fiction would be assuming that any one factoid was enough to draw inferences about best practice. Taken in isolation, each piece may be valid, but if one were to build whole models of language development in bilinguals, or of best practice based on a single factoid, then this would overlook crucial influences. Fact. The greatest fact is that all of these factors contribute together to patterns of development. It is only by understanding how all of them interact that we can come up with effective policies. Ultimately, every bilingual child and every monolingual child is different from every other. The confluence of all the above factors makes each child and each child's experience unique. In closing, let us return to the fears that some of us might exhibit or might have already exhibited as English language teachers. 1. A lack of understanding of the facility with which children learn 2 languages at a time. It is very clear that children are extremely capable of learning more than 1 language at once, without getting confused and without long-term detriments to any of those languages. However, only children. Remember the critical periods? Once those were allowed to pass without exposure to the language, it will be more difficult to learn. More difficult but not impossible. Bilingual children then have all the benefits that accrue from speaking either language, and in addition have the bonus that they speak 2 languages instead of 1. 2. A suspicion that bilingual children are at risk for academic achievement. Nothing can be further from the truth. Studies comparing the academic achievement of bilingual or multilingual children to monolingual children have shown that the former group meets or exceeds the latter. 3. A lack of understanding of the range of factors contributing to patterns of development. Every child's experience with language is different. Every child's performance in language is the product of all the above factors. This means that it is highly improbable that a given child's performance on any language or language-related task is determined by only one of the above aspects. Well, I hope everybody who watched and listened to this presentation won't anymore lack understanding of the range of factors contributing to patterns of development. I hope you learned a lot from today's discussion, classmates. Here are my references. Thank you so much. Be safe. God bless you.